The little girl stood in the middle of the crowded ballroom, staring at hundreds of moving mouths, laughing faces, and flashing cameras. But she heard none of it. Not the orchestra playing behind her, not the clinking glasses, not the applause that erupted when her billionaire father walked onto the stage. 9-year-old Emma Hayes simply watched. Then, suddenly, she noticed something strange. A man across the room was looking directly at her. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't trying to impress her father. He was a janitor in a plain Navy uniform, pushing a cleaning cart near the ballroom doors. And when Emma touched the small hearing device behind her ear and shook her head sadly, the man stopped what he was doing. His name was Daniel Carter. Most people in the room knew him only as a quiet maintenance worker. Nobody knew that 5 years earlier, Daniel had served as a Navy SEAL. Nobody knew that after leaving the military, he had become a single father raising his 8-year-old son Noah alone. And nobody knew what he carried inside the old black case hidden beneath his cleaning cart. Daniel had seen children frightened before. He had seen children confused, lonely, and desperate. But something about Emma's expression reminded him of his own son on the hardest night of their lives. So he made a decision that would change everything. He walked toward her. Emma's father, Richard Hayes, immediately noticed. Richard was one of America's wealthiest technology billionaires. His company occupied an entire skyscraper in downtown Chicago, and his name appeared regularly in business magazines. But when it came to Emma, money had never been enough. She had been born profoundly deaf. Doctors had explained that she might never experience sound naturally. Richard had spent millions on specialists, technology therapy, and experimental treatments. Nothing had worked the way he hoped. Emma had learned sign language and become exceptionally good at reading people's expressions. She was bright, funny, and deeply observant. But she had one private wish. She wanted to know what her father's voice sounded like. She wanted to hear music. She wanted to hear birds. She wanted to hear someone say, "I love you." Richard had never stopped trying to give her that miracle. But after years of disappointment, he had stopped talking about it. That evening was supposed to be a celebration. Richard was announcing a major, charitable foundation dedicated to helping children with disabilities. Emma stood beside him on stage for photographs. The crowd applauded. She smiled because she knew she was supposed to. Then she quietly slipped away. She found a small hallway outside the ballroom and sat on a bench. A moment later, Daniel appeared. He didn't speak. Instead, he crouched several feet away and pulled out his phone. He typed, "Are you okay?" Emma looked at the screen and nodded. Then she typed back, "Everyone is happy. I just wish I knew what happy sounded like." For a moment, he remembered a night years earlier. His son Noah had been terrified after Daniel returned from deployment. Daniel had tried to hide his own fear behind a smile, but Noah had seen through it. Daniel had learned something important that night. Sometimes people didn't need someone to fix everything. They needed someone willing to sit beside them. So Daniel sat beside Emma. He didn't tell her that everything would magically become perfect. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He simply stayed. After several minutes, Emma pointed toward his cleaning cart. Daniel smiled. Then he reached underneath it. Richard happened to be walking down the hallway at that exact moment. He froze, because Daniel had pulled out a small, battered black case. Richard immediately recognized the object inside. It was an old, portable sound and vibration device Daniel had modified himself. Years earlier, Daniel had worked with a military engineer who had developed experimental equipment designed to translate certain sounds into vibrations and visual signals. Daniel had kept one prototype. After leaving the military, he had modified it for Noah, who struggled with severe sensory processing issues after a childhood accident. It wasn't a medical cure. It couldn't restore hearing, but it could help a person experience sound through vibration. Daniel had spent years improving it. He carefully placed the device on the bench. Emma looked at him curiously. Then Daniel opened the case. Inside was a small silver device connected to a pair of soft wristbands. Emma pointed at it. Daniel typed, "This doesn't make you hear." She looked disappointed. Then he typed, "But maybe you can feel what sound is." Emma's eyes widened. Richard stepped forward. "Where did you get that?" Daniel looked up. "Sir, I built it." Richard's expression changed. "You built this?" Daniel nodded. "I've been working on it for years." Richard stared at the device. His company had spent millions researching accessibility technology, and a man he thought was simply a janitor had created something remarkably similar to technology his engineers had been struggling to develop. But Daniel wasn't interested in money. He was interested in Emma. He carefully placed the wristbands on her. Then he opened an audio file. Emma couldn't hear the music, but the device translated the rhythm into gentle pulses against her wrists. Her eyes widened. She looked at Daniel. He smiled. She typed, "What is it?" Daniel typed, "Music." Emma closed her eyes. For the first time in her life, she wasn't listening. She was feeling. The rhythm moved through her hands. Her face slowly changed. A tiny smile appeared. Then tears rolled down her cheeks. Richard turned away. He couldn't stop crying. His daughter had never heard music, but she was experiencing it. Daniel switched to another recording. This time, it was a simple piano melody. Emma placed one hand against the device and the other over her heart. It was the first time Richard had ever seen her react to music that way. "Again," she signed. Daniel laughed softly. "Again?" She nodded excitedly. "Again!" Richard finally stepped closer. "Daniel," he said quietly, "how much would you sell it for?" Daniel looked at him. "Nothing." Richard blinked. "Nothing?" Daniel shook his head. "My son used it when he was struggling. I built it because I wanted him to experience something he thought he had lost." Richard looked at Emma. "What if I funded a company around this?" Daniel smiled. "Then make sure it reaches families who can't afford it." That sentence silenced Richard. Most people who approached him wanted something. Contracts, investments, connections. Daniel wanted none of those things. He wanted children to have opportunities. Richard offered him a position at his company. Daniel refused. He offered him millions. Daniel refused again. Finally, Richard asked, "Then what do you want?" Daniel glanced toward the ballroom. "I want you to remember that your daughter doesn't need to be fixed." Richard lowered his eyes. Daniel continued, "She needs to be understood." Those words stayed with Richard. The following morning, Richard canceled the Foundation's original plans. Instead, he announced something completely different. He was creating the Emma Hayes Accessibility Initiative, a nonprofit program that would provide communication and sensory technology to children with disabilities. Regardless of their family's income, Daniel agreed to help design the program. But he made one condition. His name would never appear on the building. He didn't want statues. He didn't want awards. He wanted the work to matter more than the person who started it. Months passed. Daniel continued working part-time while raising Noah. Richard's foundation expanded across the country, and Emma became one of its youngest ambassadors. She visited schools and met children who communicated in different ways. She taught them something she had learned herself. Being different didn't mean being broken. One afternoon, Emma stood beside Daniel at a community center. A little boy approached her. He was deaf, too. He looked nervous. Emma smiled. Then she handed him the same kind of wrist device Daniel had given her. The boy looked at it. Emma signed. "It's music." The boy smiled. Daniel watched from across the room. No cameras, no reporters, no billion-dollar contracts, just two children discovering something new. Richard walked up beside him. "I still don't understand why you won't accept more money." Daniel smiled. "Because I've already got everything I need." Richard looked confused. Daniel pointed toward Noah, who was laughing with Emma. "My son is healthy. I have a roof over our heads. And every now and then I get to help someone feel less alone." Richard nodded slowly. Then he looked at his daughter. Emma noticed them and waved. Daniel waved back. Richard smiled. For years, it wasn't even the ability to change someone's circumstances. Sometimes it was simply seeing someone when everyone else had looked away. Emma still couldn't hear the world the way others did, but she no longer felt excluded from it. She could feel music. She could recognize laughter through vibration. She could feel the rhythm of her father's heartbeat when he hugged her. And one evening, sitting beside Daniel and Noah, she placed her hands on the little device and watched the sunset through the window. She turned toward her father and signed. "I think I know what happiness sounds like." Richard smiled through tears. "What does it sound like?" Emma pointed toward Daniel, then toward Noah, then toward her father. She placed her hand over her heart. and smiled. She didn't need words. Because sometimes love speaks in a language deeper than sound. And sometimes, the person everyone overlooks is the one who teaches the world how to listen.